Okay, City Council, regular meeting. The invocation led by, well, Pastor Joe's not here. Mrs. Swan, please, you're stepping. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Gracious Father, I ask that you be present during the proceedings here tonight. Bless this council with a spirit of wisdom and of knowledge as they consider any matters that come before them. May the discussions and comments that are shared here tonight be full of grace and the words seasoned with salt, so that all may know how to respond by providing helpful input and insight to each situation. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Okay.
Would everybody please rise for the flag salute? Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Next item, roll call, please.
Councilmember Durr.
Here.
Councilmember Franco.
Here.
Councilmember Montijo.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Robertson.
Here.
Mayor Avalos.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. Under the provisions of the Brown Act, in the event that the city receives information after the posting of the agenda, the city is able to add items to its regular meeting. City staff, after the posting of the agenda on Friday, received certain information related to anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation. So I would request that the council include a closed session on tonight's agenda under section 54956.9 D2 of the Brown Act. In order to do that, Mr. Mayor, we would need a 4/5 vote of this council.
Okay, we need a motion on the floor.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Roll call.
Councilmember Durr.
Aye.
Councilmember Franco.
Aye.
Councilmember Montijo.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Robertson.
Aye.
Mayor Avalos.
Aye. Okay, we have to adjourn the section session.
Where do you want to put that?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, if we could do that adjournment after item 4 to close session.
Item 4, okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have to adjourn to executive session.
After item 4.
After item 4, okay, we'll do it. We'll move on then. Okay,
Moving on.
all right. All right, all right, a potential conflict, any city council have potential conflict may identify the item and accuse himself and discuss and voting on the matter. Anybody here on any of these matters? Okay, we'll move on. We have a special presentation from Talent's Public Affairs Company. State your name and
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Richard Harmon with Townsend Public Affairs. I'll try to be brief. You know, only I think the joke is what, like an hour or so, and we should be done. But in all seriousness, I think I only have like 8 slides here.
Oh, good.
Most of this was going to be verbal. Wanted to share a few updates, but wanted to spend a little bit of time just kind of on the looking ahead, because there's some stuff coming down the road. And in today's world with funding, it's all about being prepared and having everything together so you can be ready for when those opportunities come up. So with that, I also violated the cardinal rule of giving you a bunch of information before I started talking. But I was going to reference some of the stuff, some of the reports in there during my presentation. So I wanted to make sure you had it. And I'll provide it electronically after. So let me see. And Raina told me this was so easy, anyone could do it. I'm doing page, there we go. Short introduction. So I was a point person when we worked with the city here 2 to 3 years ago. And when there was an opportunity, gosh, I think it was in February or so this year, February, March, to come back on and do some additional work. I was in the middle of some projects, and I had some sponsored bills in Sacramento that I was busy with. So Sharon on our team had stepped in to do some work and get started on that. So personally, very happy to be back here and working with you. You have great staff. The council's always been terrific. a lot of good projects. So really, really personally happy to be back and working on this. Just as a note, in the past, I think it was back in 2015-16, it was during cycle 2 of the active transportation program, and in that year we had a couple. And what really made me happy at the time was I think we ranked number 1 and 4 in Fresno County for our 2 applications. We did an active transportation plan, and I'd love to hear an update on how that was going. But also we did some safe routes to school improvements, and we had two successful applications at the time. And again, Fresno COG, those were funded through the regional funds. Through Fresno COG, we were ranked 1 and 4. We also applied for the Stormwater Grant Program, which was a planning grant for some of the Prop 1 monies. This one wasn't funded, and I'll be honest, it wasn't a surprise when we'd met with the Water Board prior to submitting an application. They said they wanted to see planning applications that dealt with an entire watershed and not just a city or a county or a part of that, because they thought a wiser use of the money was the IRWM, the Integrated Regional Water Management level, which deals with watersheds. But we wanted to make sure we at least had something in there. You never know, they change their mind. It wasn't a rule against applying, but when they did make all their awards, I think only one city got funding, and I think it was the city of Reading, and it was because their project was actually a watershed level for the area around Reading. But I'll have more on water funding in just a little bit. Jumping back to this, want to talk a little bit about current activities that Sharon on our team worked with your staff on leading up till now. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about upcoming opportunities, because there's going to be a lot, there is a lot, and there's going to be a lot after the November election. And that's where the materials in your folder come in handy. On, I think the right-hand side is just a copy of the presentation. But on the left, I put together a memo that walks through Proposition 68, which was the park bond. We'll talk a little bit more about it. That was approved in June. So there's a memo on that, as well as a memo on the upcoming water bond on the November ballot. The final thing you'll see in there is a sort of a monthly summary. As you know, in Sacramento, we just finished the legislative session about 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday. So there's a little summary just of what happened up there, but the relevant part is in the back. There's a couple pages of some of the grant programs that are coming up between now and kind of next summer. So the last 2 pages of that contain that information. And then I just wanted to spend a minute on some next steps. So if I'm talking too fast, feel free to interrupt. I'm very informal. Interrupt if you have a question. I tend to talk kind of fast. I know you're all anxious to get on with the rest of the agenda. I know this year there was a couple projects. There was a Rockwell Pond project, and I think this involved some trees and some trails. It was applied for through the Urban Greening Grant Program, which is cap and trade funds, comes around every year. I think at the time we wanted to get something in, even though I don't believe the project back in March was fully scoped out. We didn't have a lot of the design work. I think there's still some site control issues related to that. But one of the strategies we like to use, that if we have enough information to submit an application to get in the door, even if we know it's likely not going to be competitive, if we know that program's going to come around again, even a little bit of feedback from that funding agency can be beneficial. So part of the strategy here was to, one, kind of motivationally get started on that project, but also be prepared for debriefing with the Natural Resources Agency. In fact, Polly Escovedo with the Resources Agency, who handles this program, I saw her last week, so we'll be discussing with her the application. Aside from you guys probably weren't quite ready, we want to know nuts and bolts, is this sort of the thing you're looking for? I'm going to bring this up again in a moment, because some of the parks bond, the Proposition 68, is super relevant for the components of the project. I know we helped with the Department of Justice, the JAGAS, Justice Assistant Grant Program. That one is more of a formula program, but I believe Sharon helped Chief Garner and the police department just with the documentation that was required for submittal on that. And then most recently, we just did cycle 4 of the active transportation program. And I know we looked at a segment of the multi-use trail that'll go down Golden State on Selma Branch Canal. We're actually now in the second phase of that in terms of advocacy, because this is the time, The California Transportation Commission has taken all those applications, they've logged them all in, and now they've sent those out to these volunteer reviewers who are all commenting, making notes, scoring them, which is the process for the next couple months. So what we're preparing now is the advocacy through our legislative representatives for them to just make some calls, emails into the Transportation Commission, doing some additional pitches for the project. They submitted letters of support with the application, but it's also nice for the agency to hear from them that, hey, this is enough of a, enough importance to the legislator that they want to call, speak to me. So that's what we're entering now. I think we're expecting recommendations on that program in November or so. There is a lot more money in the ATP program this cycle because of Senate Bill 1. I don't have the exact number of how much this Transportation Commission received in funding requests, but I believe it was above $1.2 billion from local agencies for projects. So we'll be looking at a lot of competition at the state level, albeit more money, but also locally, regionally. Fresno Cog again will have their pot of funds. They'll look at applications after the state has for possible funding.
Can we use the Golden State Corridor project as a match for that,
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
for the ATP, the Cycle 4? Is
Yeah.
this gonna be a big bike and jogging path from Fowler to Kingsburg?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the source, I don't have the application in front of me, but the source of the matching funds, whether it was just general funds from the city as the match. The ATP doesn't require match, although it does help. And I don't have that in front of me, but I'll check. But it's a very good point. The regionalism of that project is what they love to see, because the whole Golden State Corridor improvements are terrific, but the state likes to see that you're working as a region and providing connectivity within that
Well,
region.
Yeah, because we actually are, you know. So can you look into that with the COG
Oh, sure. You mean in terms of the match? Yeah.
of that?
Like I said, I think we may have just tagged general fund as a match, but I will double check and get back to
Okay.
Isaac about that. So now, these two programs are a couple that I know Sharon has spoken about with staff that I'll be now following up on. River Parkways is one that will fund different sorts of improvements near creeks, rivers, even if they're dry. The program itself has been dormant for a few years because they haven't had funding. They do have a little bit of funding this year. They are expecting, I met with the agency a couple weeks ago, they're expecting to do about 7 awards statewide. So the staff there said, everyone calm down, we're only gonna do about 7 awards, so make sure you have a project that's ready to go, that has a lot of support, a lot of community engagement, but just be optimistic that Proposition 3, which again we'll talk about, has about 70 million for River Parkways. So I think should the voters approve Proposition 3 on the November ballot, we are going to see this program continue on with some robust funding. Everyone kind of gasped when they said only 7 awards statewide. So we're going to consider to see if there's something we have that fits there. They're doing a concept proposal application this year, so you don't have to do the whole thing when there's so few awards. You can do just a concept, and they'll score those and then invite you possibly to do a full application. The other one I know Sharon has spoken about, Sustainable Transportation Planning Grants. This program now, in the past, you could have asked for this for bicycle pedestrian master plans, active transportation plans. If you have corridors where it's challenging for pedestrians, bicyclists to access and get from place to place because of safety issues or just of how the facility is designed, this would be a grant that you could get to actually look at those mobility problems and try to find some solutions for the facility. The funding this time also has some funding available for climate adaptation. So if you have transportation facilities, for example, in an area that is prone to flooding, arguments are that with climate change, there'll be more dramatic weather events and flooding could be a problem. So if you have transportation facilities that are prone to some of those effects, fire, flooding, you can actually get a planning grant to look at how you could redesign that facility to go forward. So I'll be speaking to staff. They're still working through the guidelines on this, but we're anticipating a due date about on November 2nd. And the nice thing about planning grants is they're all about community engagement. You don't have to have the community engagement ahead of time when you apply. The point of the application is to do a dynamic community engagement process. So I mentioned just a couple key points, looking at connectivity issues in the community, as well as the community engagement, especially disadvantaged communities. They want people, they don't want to see the application say, we're going to have a council meeting where we're going to have a public hearing and that's going to be our public engagement process. They want to see you at school, if it's related to schools, at a school. They want to see you thinking outside the box in terms of how you reach members of your community who don't traditionally maybe come to a city council meeting, don't often go to the after school things. So how do you reach those folks who have jobs, who have kids, maybe have language barriers, and what are you doing creatively? So that kind of just helps with the competitiveness of an application.
How much money is in this program? that you're-
Traditionally, it's about 25 million, but the planning grants average between, I'd say 85 to 250. So they're smaller amounts. And again, some of this has been funding from SB1 has provided a little bit more funding for this program.
Interesting.
Oh my God. So Proposition 68, and as I mentioned, there's a short memo. I guess that one's not short because there's a lot of info. There's a memo in your folder about this. This was Senate Bill 5 last year in the legislature, became Proposition 68 on the June ballot, was approved by voters. Originally, the legislature had been looking for a lot more money than $4 billion for parks and water. The governor said, hey, I don't like a lot more debt. I spent my term, my last 2 terms trying to buy down that debt of the state. I don't want to do a whole bunch more general obligation bonds. So he said, $4 billion is kind of the range you should be looking at. So they combined it with it's parks and water, $4 billion. Some of the key components, I think about $2.5 billion of that is for sort of the parks and recreation piece. There is a per capita program here, roughly, and I think Selma would probably be in line for about $200,000 of minimum funding through that, given the size of the city, and that's flexible. That will automatically go. It is flexible. You can use it for maintenance, rehabilitation. Potentially, you could use it as match dollars for other programs. But I would just note at the end of that memo, we have some next steps in there because we spent a lot of time with the Department of Parks and Recreation and the Resources Agency wanting to know when are these dollars coming out the door? What programs are you going to create for them? Are you going to put them in existing parks programs and just add money into those programs? How are you going to get this out? So the per capita will be coming out in the spring. There's another chunk, and it's about $230 million, I think. I don't know if you all recall, but Proposition 84 that was on the ballot a number of years ago had a program called the Statewide Parks Program, and they did 2 rounds of that. I think the closest example, I don't remember if Selma was part of that. I know if any of you have been to Dinuba, they have a warehouse down by their police department. That was an old warehouse, it was empty, and they converted it into an indoor sports. So in the summer when it's hot, there's indoor soccer, there's basketball, there was things for senior citizens to do aerobics, and then in the parking lot they made it like a skate park. So this will be technically round 3 of that statewide parks program, and these are projects, I like to think of them as a little bit bigger parks projects, so it's not replacing playground equipment or something like that. They want you to think about how are you providing a new community recreation park facility opportunity for residents, and to really think outside the box and don't just say, well, we want to just put some grass in and put a couple pieces of playground equipment, but do a community engagement process.
Like a community park, perhaps in a disadvantaged area, perhaps adding a gym, something a little more ambitious than planting an herb garden.
A gym might be a big ask, but you're right, and it's competitiveness will depend a lot on how you've engaged that community, so that your project is reflecting what they want in that community. Which is why I'm bringing this up now, because even though the application may not be due until May next year, May or June perhaps, there's a lot of community engagement that should go into what you're actually going to apply for. Too often an agency goes in and says, we're going to apply for this. Here you go. Oh, we need to do a community meeting. So you go tell your residents, we're going to apply for this. Thanks for coming. They want to see you going out and asking what is it that would get you outside? What is it that you need in the community? So this timeline gives us enough time to do some of that engagement.
Richard, maybe I don't quite understand correctly, but I'm looking at 725 million for park poor communities. How do rural communities like ourselves compete with larger communities like San Jose, San Francisco, LA that are definitely very park poor? How do we mitigate that?
So the Department of Parks and Recreation, they're going to be using their community fact finder tool, which some of you may be familiar with. Today we always talk about Cal EnviroScreen. This uses the California Fact Finder, and what it is you select the location of your project, and it has the database, and it looks at how much park acreage you have, what are your median incomes of that area, what is your population, and it produces a number that they can reference that tries to be more geography neutral.
More income-based, more demographic-based?
They like it to be. I mean, sometimes when you're looking at downtown Los Angeles and your dot has 15,000 people in it, so the benefits are for 15,000 people as opposed to maybe 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. It's only one consideration. They're going to look at the income. We can still make the arguments on disadvantaged communities. So a lot of that is in how you write that. But I think they're using tools that are as objective as we can expect them to be.
How much of this will go to COG and how much will go to the individual cities?
So the 725 includes a few other pots with it, but there, for example, there will be pots of funding for like park districts, so official agencies that are park districts. None of this goes through a COG, since the COG doesn't have that sort of coordination like they do on the transportation side. So there will be pots of funding for park districts and other special districts, but the majority of this, you can be a city, county, you can be a nonprofit, all of those are eligible.
And the first round of applications are due?
We're looking at probably late spring by the time they finish the guidelines. Like you said, they're putting them, this is one of the instances where they're putting the money into an existing program that's functioned a couple times. So they're gonna do some updating to the guidelines through workshops, but it should be fairly quick. There will be other pots, and that's where I mentioned Rockwell Pond, is that there's other pots of funding that haven't been detailed yet in terms of how they're gonna be structured, that are all about trails and greenway investments. So there's different pots of funding that will come out over the next year or two that could be tailored to a project such as Rockwell Pond and fit it just perfectly. Because you're creating sort of a greenway area in the city, utilizing resources such as the pond as sort of the, I don't want to say water feature, but it kind of is. So. Proposition 3 on the November ballot, this is what any water agency in the state was not happy with Prop 1 here a few years ago. Felt there just wasn't quite enough money in it because water projects are expensive, just like transportation, they're expensive, but water projects are expensive. Felt there wasn't enough funds in that. And clearly Proposition 68, I know it's $1.5 billion, but when you start breaking that down into water projects, it doesn't go very far. So in the legislature last year, former Natural Resources Deputy Secretary Jerry Merrill tried to work with the legislature and say, hey, let's do something big. The legislature was getting the word from the governor's office, think small. So Jerry Merrill said, well, we're just gonna do our own. So he's doing Proposition 3, which is nearly, it's like 8.67, it's nearly $9 billion for water projects. And these are going to be, I mean, bread and butter. There's money for conservancies, there's money for stormwater, for clean drinking water. Basically all the programs run through the state, there'll be additional funding. So I know we've talked in the past a lot about stormwater, stormwater management. There is some of that in Prop 68 too, smaller amount. And just for reference, Prop 1, the planning grant I mentioned earlier from a couple years ago, was to set us up for the implementation dollars, which are still not out yet. In fact, they may not be out from Prop 1 until next spring. So Prop 68 has stormwater, and there's a lot of stormwater in Prop 3. So I'm not here on behalf.
If we already did the integrated regional water master plan, does that pre-qualify us for Prop 3? Or will there be a new set of qualifications like?
There were no new requirements
B1.
in Prop 3. This was really a dollar amount, and here are the programs they should be going to. And I'm not here on behalf of the campaign. I don't know how the council feels about, I mean, again, it's bond indebtedness. It's a cost to the state. You know, we could be facing some severe budget deficits in the future at the state level. So I'm not here pitching for it, but I do, it's kind of like SB1. I mean, when it comes to it, there's a lot of money for critical, city needs.
They just made a lot of red tape to have to get through, get that funding.
That's true, transparent, it's called transparency. And accountability, right?
Opaque.
In fact, I asked the Department of Parks and Recreation last week with the per capita dollars. I said, hey, are you doing something similar to the new gas tax dollars where we have to like submit something saying, here's what we're gonna do with our $200,000? And they said no, that after you use the money and you've completed a project with it, they like to see kind of close out, hey, here's what we spent our dollars on. So you don't write back and say, we spent it on a big party or something. So yeah, but
Accountability.
No, that's tax
really
dollars.
quickly, this is not new, but it goes back to urban greening. So if you'll remember last year, the legislature and governor took new action to extend the state's cap and trade program. They approved it with a 2/3 vote. It was subject to a lawsuit at the time that likely the state was gonna lose because they didn't approve what many saw as a new tax. They didn't approve it with a 2/3 vote. So they were likely gonna lose that. So the governor had been pushing for a couple of years, hey, if we want cap and trade to stick around, we need to approve it and then we can extend it. And it took them a while because the legislature did not want to take another vote on it. But they did, they got it last year. And his real concern was all those cap and trade markets where they actually auction those carbon credits were dismally low. I mean, in the few millions of dollars when before they would receive $1 billion at an auction. So they took those actions. The cap and trade auctions rebounded. There's funding out there. This year in the budget was about $1.5 billion. These priorities are really the Governor Brown's priorities. I mean, he's had, high-speed rail, the urban greening program, which has been around, affordable housing, sustainability program, which have been around. I make this note about potential changes with the new governor because Governor Brown really has had his hand with the legislature being fiscally prudent. Here's what I think we should do, and there's a lot of respect for him. He's been around a long time, and I think the legislature has deferred a lot to him. They've tried to argue for some different programs in the budget, but generally he gets what he wants. But with the new governor, we could see some of these programs they fund change. Things like high-speed rail are in statute because Governor Brown made sure those were fixed, but that could be changed. And some of the rest of the discretionary money could be changed for different programs. So it's more of just an FYI that with the new governor, we might see changing priorities between the governor and the legislature on where they want to spend these funds going forward. Oops, I'm going back the wrong way. I'm like, I already talked about that. So I just had a couple next steps. One was for me, luckily, I mean, you have some great staff here and a lot of them have been around. I'm gonna be touching base, particularly on like the river parkways, the planning grants, just to make sure we're ready to go. And a lot of experience with like the Caltrans planning grants, done many of those. So that's the next step for me over the next few days, couple weeks. Proposition 68 guideline workshops. I mentioned that they're going to go through workshops to talk about, right now it's that statewide parks program, but what we do is we participate in all those workshops. We don't expect a lot of changes to this program, and it was a really good program, but some of the new programs that come out of Prop 68, we want to make sure as they're developing those guidelines, they're not, writing them in a way that would discriminate against, some Central Valley cities, for example, or a certain type of, like if the Rockwell Pond project with the recreation area, we don't want those to be written out as not competitive or not eligible. So over the next few years, to be honest, but particularly the next few months, participate in all the guideline workshops so we can see what they're developing and be able to offer feedback in that process. I spoke a little bit ago with Councilmember Franco. League of Cities is next week, the conference down in Long Beach. Councilmember Madera, I know you're probably going as well. Need anything down there, just holler. Love to have coffee and just talk about other things, projects, priorities, and other council members. Happy to do the same here.
Yeah, we actually have two. We have Mike and Franco are going.
Yes. I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't
Okay.
speak up, Councilmember.
It'd be a good idea if you connect with them,
Yeah,
when
no,
they're
I'd love to.
there,
And then, of course, a new city manager. coming in October 22nd or so, and
Yep.
wanting to make sure that they have, the heads up of what's in the pipeline, just so that if we're starting down the road of community engagement and having plans and designs ready to go for when these programs open up, so that we make sure we emphasize these are priorities and this is why we're doing it. So I want to make sure we spend time doing that. So not quite an hour, but I am happy to answer more questions. But again, happy to be here, and Sharon enjoyed her time, and she's still a resource for me, but happy to be back working.
You
Quick
have-
question, Richard.
Absolutely.
So if I understand your slide that you presented for us, what you're currently working on is just what's on slide 4, the current activities?
Yes.
Okay. And then the rest, you're really not writing grants for these yet? You're just waiting for funding to become available?
So I talked kind of high level about Proposition 68, and some of that will be coming out here in the spring. Probably, they would probably be due in May or so, but the applications would probably open up in March. But we would be working prior to that on the community engagement, because part of our role is if you're having a community meeting to talk about this grant program, what can we apply for, we'd like to be there and offer the sort of the expert, like, here's what the program's about, here's what it likes to fund.
When can we expect that to happen?
I'd like to sit down and find out sort of so it's nice to start just kind of from a staff level and a council level, what projects are on the horizon or what have been thought about, just so we have a frame of reference. But I mean, those can't start early enough, because funding agencies don't like to see that you did it like the day before you submitted your application. But these next two,
Prior to the end of the year, you're thinking?
I would hope so. I mean,
you know,
I'd like to see those October, November, at least an initial one. It doesn't have to be every week.
Right.
But just an initial kickoff, like Proposition 68, what it means for Selma residents sort of theme, and talk about the different programs. And it would be an initial sort of meeting. And then following that, you could have subsequent ones when we know which grant program we're going for, to do something a little more focused.
And this is a snapshot, right, Richard? If other opportunities come up, you'll be looking at them and you'll be presenting that to the city staff.
That's right. So, I mean, these are two that are coming up very soon, that we'll be working on. But also, like I mentioned, the last couple pages of that the third Word document on the left side of your folder, there's a longer view of some other ones coming down the road.
I know you have something coming up on November on the ballot, stormwater management, that's a key component, for all cities, believe it or not. I'll be straight up, that's the thing in the future for all cities. I think, we like to be informed, early as possible where we're at, and, that'd be a discussion for the city council, even make direction in that area,
Sure.
because I know the importance of that right now,
Well, it boggles my mind that when 2 to 3 years ago, when I was working with the city, we were anticipating the release of the Proposition 1 stormwater implementation money, and it's still not out yet. And when I go see the water board, I say this fall, and they're like, maybe, but why don't you just more calendar next spring? And a lot of it's not their fault. It's not the state agency's fault necessarily. They put out that planning money to do those watershed level plans to make sure everyone's up to par on their stormwater plans. And some of those local IRWM groups, it took longer than expected to get a consultant on board, to do the plan, to do the planning process. And I know early on that was their fear, was that some of those processes would take a long time. So I think there's shared sort of, not blame, but shared delay from the state and from the watershed groups.
Richard, since, not in the past, but since we required your services again, Townsend, how many grants have we actually submitted for the behalf of Selma? How much have you done?
It would be back to the 3.
Three? And where are we on those process?
So the urban greening is the one that we knew wasn't quite ready. So we are actually we'll be working with staff to debrief with the resources agency on the next round of that and how do we improve. And again, that was one where I think in Prop 68, there's probably some better opportunities. I may defer to the chief in terms of the timeline. I know, US DOJ is probably pretty slow in getting money into accounts, but that may be coming on the DOJ, may be coming soon. And then Active Transportation will know, should be end of November, we'll know what the recommendations are at the state level for that. And I was thinking on my way down here, just with other programs I've worked on, and in the last 4 or 5 months, these are kind of the ones that have been out there. The one thing we can't do is tell folks to start a new program. we need a new program now. So yeah, I think that's where we are.
Right.
So originally, we had hired Townsend in order to get us conveyance, some funds for conveyance, because that's really looming large on the horizon for the city of Selma. We have a deal with CID where we need to provide conveyance by a particular date. How optimistic are you that, how promising does it look that we'll get stormwater money? Because that's something that we really, really need.
I'm trying to remember the dollar amount. I think it's another 200 or so million in Proposition 1 that will be coming out in the spring. Like Councilmember Robertson said, stormwater in most cities are a priority. So I always tend to be optimistic. You put your best package together in terms of what your needs are, your demographics, how quickly you can move in doing the improvements. So I am more optimistic on the longer term, say in the next year to 18 months, because the Proposition $68 will be in the pipeline for stormwater, and if voters approve Proposition 3, there will be a large influx after November and rolling into that next year. So again, I mentioned earlier, water agencies were not happy with Proposition 1 because all the programs they thought were much more constrained than they had to be. And stormwater is like any other one. They're constrained, but you put together the best application you can and work with our legislators to make sure they have it as a priority. So
Can we see you every quarter, Richard?
absolutely, I'm here.
Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan to me.
And
Yeah.
then, are you guys lobbyists too? Or are you just
We do.
grant writers?
You do.
You do both? Because
We
the city
do.
has retained a lobbyist firm as well, and there were some questions from the folks at the last meeting whether or not we did. We were hiring 2 different companies do the same thing. Was there some overlap? But you guys are not in the lobby business. You're mostly in the grant business. Is that correct?
Why we do both? In fact, I would say the traditional client I work with is a city, public agency. It's a city, and we do state, federal, legislative advocacy, as well as the funding, all 3. Because again, on the grants, I mean, the programs come out when they come out, so there may be times when it's a little slower on when those programs are out there.
2 could be kind of related, I guess.
Yeah, no, and actually, you'll notice with some grant firms that just do grants, they don't register as lobbyists. Even for clients we have where we are just the grant writer, we will often ask if we can register them with the Secretary of State, because a lot of our work in Sacramento and in DC with the funding agencies, it can be construed as lobbying.
But we've retained your firm, Townsend, as grant writers.
This
Not
is,
as-
yeah,
not
this
as
is, oh yeah,
lobbyists.
no, this is grant writing.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was the understanding that you were strictly grant writers.
Yes.
And were you contacted by any other firm? Was there any other company that contacted you, any lobbying company, to work?
they reached
work-
out to you,
work
in other
with you?
words.
Did anybody reach out?
Recent?
My understanding
Recently?
was they were gonna reach out to.
I thought they said they had at the
Yeah,
last meeting or
they did.
something, and
Yeah.
they hadn't heard back or something.
No.
I
s-
don't,
So I know the city has a state lobbyist, and I think it's had for a number of years.
mhm.
I've spoken to them before, and I believe it was a little over 2, probably about 2.5 years ago now, when the idea of police department funding came up. And we weren't under contract with the city at the time, because we'd worked on the active transportation applications and on the stormwater, so we were on a project
You are on a per project
per
basis.
project at the time. So we're under contract, but I remember Mr. Gray, I think was city manager at the time, reached out and said, hey, could you speak to our lobbyist? We understand you're working with some other cities on trying to get police department funding. And in fact, we were working with 3 other small cities in Fresno County on police departments. They were all located in Senator Canella's district, which was kind of the pitch, because at the time he had some leverage with legislative leadership, and he was going to be asking for some of this. So we did contact, we were in contact with your lobbyist, said, hey, we want to bring Selma into it. And we had talked because it's Senator Videk's district, Mr. Rambula had not been elected. And we told him, you know, we need you guys to bring your legislators to the group, basically, because Senator Cannella couldn't ask for Selma's project.
Okay.
And at the time, they had asked, I'm not speaking out of turn, but the firm had asked us to drop one of our cities from the request and said it wasn't really, shouldn't have a police department, probably is gonna screw up our whole request. And we're kind of loyal people, and so we said, you know, we're not gonna pull anyone out of our request. And I think your lobbyist enlisted the help of Mr. Assemblymember Gray from up north, because you didn't have an assembly member at the time, to help with it. And in the end, all 4 cities received the funding earmark in that budget.
Gotcha. Thanks for
So does that answer your
clarifying
question? So since
Not
that
really.
time, no, and I, you know, we work.
Yeah, the
Not
guy,
recently.
yeah, the guy went up north with Adam Gray. I know
Okay.
him, I know him.
Yeah, no, and I've been lobbying
he
for
is.
cities for about 8 years, and I've never met the firm. You know, we're pretty
one
much
that's
on all
on
the
the-
big city
I-
bills.
I worked on his campaign, I know.
Okay, okay, maybe that was a connection.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome, I'm sorry.
Any more questions from the council? All right, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to the next item. Okay, this oral communication. At this time, member of the public can address the city council regarding any item over the city council's jurisdiction. No action will be discussed or taken on the agenda. These shall be raised and referred to the city manager for review. Member of the public has 3 minutes for remark. Anybody can come forward, state your name, and Oscar, it's good to meet you here. Thank you.
Mayor, City Council, evening. My name is Oscar Garcia, and I'm the CPA. And I live in Selma, and I've lived in Selma for the last 17 years, and I am your County of Fresno Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector. I was appointed in 2016 to fill out the unfinished term for the last controller that retired prematurely. I have 10.5 years experience in governmental and accounting and auditing. I passed fiscal policy in the county that identified $40 million in my first year for general fund use in county operations like public protection. In the second year, which is this past year, $50 million. And I guess that's why I have all 5 Board of Supervisors supporting me, including District 4 Buddy Mendez, which is the supervisor for Selma. And I have 4 of the mayors supporting me, Mayor of Fresno, Mayor of Kerman, Mayor of Parlier, and of course, Mayor of Selma. What does this mean for Selma? So my office also handles the collecting taxes. And what that means is that I am ensuring that the city of Selma gets what they are owed as far as when we apportion taxes, so timely and accurately. And so I've changed a lot of processes in the office, and I'm still cleaning up stuff. And hopefully I can keep going. You probably saw a couple of my signs out there. I don't have a whole lot of signs because I don't have a whole lot of money because I believe in being a little frugal. And so I would be happy to answer any questions after the meeting if anyone has any questions. I mean, I have my business cards here. So does anyone want my business cards? And I'd be happy to set up a meeting with any of you. Anytime you are in Fresno, I'm at the Hall of Records. And the reason I haven't come out here before is because I've been busy fixing it from within and then going out. So thanks for your time.
Oscar? Thank you, Oscar.
Coming out.
Thank you. Our residents from Selma, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We'll move on to the next item. Consent calendar. All items under the consent calendar are considered routine. The completed consent calendar will be exacted by one motion by roll call. All purpose of discussion by any council will have the item any manner removed from this consent calendar and made a part of the regular agenda. And the rest of the city council will make approval for the rest of the city council. Oh boy. City council may approve the remaining consent calendar. Okay, anything wants to be removed on the consent calendar, guys? No? Boy,
Move for approval of the
all
consent
right,
calendar.
that's a first, man. I'm proud of you guys. Isaac, all right. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Durr,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Robertson,
Aye.
Councilmember Franco,
Aye.
Councilmember Montijo,
Aye, we broke an on-time record, guys. Okay, next item. Public hearing, okay. Regular business, item 2, consider resolution approving the request fee waiver for the Selma Chamber of Commerce Car Show event. Okay, Isaac?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The document or resolution you have in front of you is a request on behalf of the Selma Chamber of Commerce for a waiver of the fees for their annual car show event. I believe, is Bob here tonight?
Anybody here?
Did
Shar, can you
did
wanna
you
talk
wanna
on that?
speak, Shar?
We've waived this in the past.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, we are asking our fees to be waived for our annual car show that we have normally around 100 cars that come into Selma and a pretty large crowd. We have vendors and it brings a lot of people into Selma and they have an opportunity to eat at the restaurants that they choose or go shopping here at our local shops. So we are asking for a fee waiver, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Did council approve this last year?
Yeah, we did. We approved it last year. Okay,
Second.
all right. Roll call, please.
Mr. Mayor, you may want to ask
Oh,
for
wait a-
public comment.
Oh, sorry. Anybody from the public can make a comment on this issue? Can come forward? Okay, refer it back to council. All right. Motion was made. Okay,
Call the roll.
roll call, please.
Councilmember Montiel?
Aye.
Councilmember Franco?
Aye.
Councilmember Durr?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Robertson?
Aye.
Mayor Avalos?
Aye. Okay, move on. Next item, item number 3. Okay, discussion and direction regarding the conditional use permit for the 1.65 megawatts photovoltaic solar power generator faculty on the west side of McCall Avenue, approximately 1,915 feet south of the intersection of Manning Avenue, a request by the City Fresno County Board of Supervisors. Okay. Isaac?
Thank you again,
I
Mayor.
knew it came back to us, so.
Council. The resolution you have in front of you, there's actually 2 of them. One is approving the project, the other is opposing the project. What has happened for this item here is it is a solar project outside of our city limits, but in our sphere. It has gone to the county for approval through the planning department and the board of supervisors. The planning department did reject the proposal, so the planning commission at the county,
What was the vote?
I believe it was
8-0.
8-0. That's
8-0.
correct. So it went for appeal to the board of supervisors, and so at the board of supervisors meeting, there was a stipulation from the mayor to actually reject the project itself. At that meeting, in turn, they requested it come back to the body as a whole so that we give our full body approval or rejection of the project itself. Or in addition, you can stick to the stipulation that what happened in previously with the planning department and the city manager here at the city that basically stated there was some terminations that we'd like on the project for landscaping and things of that nature, and also taking into account the McCall widening that's gonna happen in the future. So that's the stipulation of the project itself.
Can we
It-
just say we agree with the planning department of the county and rest of their decision?
Well, yeah, the planning department of the county rejected,
If you want to approve with the planning commission of the county, that would be basically just rejecting the project.
rejecting the project. That's what they did, Franco.
Do we have any?
You do have, Mr. Jerry.
No, he's here. The
He
gentleman's
is here.
He came.
He would like to give a small presentation
yeah.
on the project so you get a better understanding of what
Yeah.
this project
Yeah,
is.
I didn't want him to hear, you know, I want
Jerry?
the public to hear.
Or, I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Jeremy Kraut, and I'm representing the project on behalf of the applicant who applied for the CUP at the county, a company by the name of Forefront Power, who is a solar development builder and developer. And I'd like to give you a brief overview and background to give you a better understanding why we're here tonight, and some clarifications, including what Councilman Franco asked. There's a slight correction to that just to make it clear on what occurred. So if you don't mind, I'll give some background and then I'll bring it back to the question you just asked, Councilman Franco. So the Mahal Solar Project, I'm hitting page down. I'm sorry? I believe in me, I'm hitting the down. And it's not going. Okay. Yeah. All right, so here's the location that we were talking about. It's about a 20-acre site, and it is off McCall. And let me see if it's going to work this time. Oh, to the screen? Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry, I was pointing the wrong direction. Okay, so the 20-acre site, here's the design of the project. It's the proposal is for only 9 acres of the site, and it's 1.65 megawatts. So it's a relatively small project that's considered what they say is distributed generated solar, which is intended for small sites, small projects that have all the infrastructure readily available to the site. And really the purpose of this, it goes into a program called the Community Solar Program. What that means is that Forefront Power has done surveys of your residents and people outside your city within 10-mile radius of this project site to see if they're interested in subscribing to the solar power that's coming off of this facility. When they subscribe to that power, what that allows them to do is reduce their electric bills by 5 to 10% and lock in their rates for the 25-year program or 20-year program that the solar facility would be in place. This would be only for that amount of time. Oh, did I confuse me? Do I need to repeat? No. Okay, I won't repeat. When they subscribe to this program, they can lock themselves into this lower rate. As you know, PG&E is one of the higher cost utilities in California, along with San Diego Gas and Electric. They're the two highest, some of the two highest in the state, and those two areas have this solar program, the community solar program, going on today, and the Forefront Power is one of the leaders in that program. So again, residents who can't put solar on their rooftops, who are renting their homes, businesses who are renting their facilities, they can subscribe to this and receive that benefit of the reduced electrical costs coming off this facility. They want to locate it closer to the demand sources, so places like Selma and other areas where you have a demand, a community that's nearby, and all they have to do, I have a website link later on in the presentation where you can just go in, log yourself in, say you're interested in the solar power coming off this, and the company would contact you to see if you want to purchase the power from there. And it, again, you buy the power from the facility, it gives you a credit back on your electric bill. So it's a straight reduction in your costs and at a reduced cost too. So it's a big benefit. A lot of communities really see the benefit of these coming in, especially with people who can't put their own solar facilities on their site. The costs obviously are pretty high to put something on your rooftop or on the ground. So this reduces that cost. In choosing the site, we're looking for locations where it wouldn't have an impact on the surrounding area. And what we did is we talked to each of the residents who are adjacent to the site, received their support, found that they did not have any concern with that, and we planned the site to be located well away from the street so it would not be visible. You can see that there's more than 300 feet it's 265 just to the residence that's in front up against McCall. And then there's another about 75 feet. So it's over 300 feet from the street, located well back from the residence. And again, I talked to each of the homeowners there, and they had no concern with the solar facility, and they're the closest to the solar facility. And then the remainder of the site would be remain in vineyards. The owners of the property, they have been leasing the property for vineyards, but they've found that the revenue in grape sales just is not there, and they're not having the production that they once did or the demand for the grapes. So that's why they're looking at other alternatives to find revenue that they can draw from the land. As far as we've looked at other opportunities for different types of development on the site. The site does have a drainage that goes, a farm drain that goes right through the property, which limits the ability to develop the property as residential or any other use. it also has a minimum lot size that's required in the county. So this is a way to, again, for the property owner to have some revenue coming off the property that they would otherwise not be able, excuse me, not be able to obtain because of the reduced revenue coming from the grapes. This is the street view from the street. Right now, if you go out there, it's getting a little overgrown, but it's a similar view. The county has a lot of requirements for solar facilities that makes it compatible with agricultural properties next door. This is a lot of the stuff we have to address. We have to look at the impacts on ag operations. We have to look at noise, dust control, visibility, and other aspects of the solar facility to ensure we do not impact both agriculture and other uses like residential that's next door. We are required to prepare a pest management plan. We are required to do a decommissioning plan as well. So at the end of the 20-year lifespan, they would have to remove the facility and return the land back to a similar condition that it is today. They have to bond for that as well. So there are a lot of requirements that the county places on the project, and so if they ever wanted to extend that time frame, they'd have to go back in for another conditional use permit. You'd receive notice just like we did before, and we'd have to go through the process that we are today. And then there are notices that have to be filed about the right to farm next door so that anybody who's operating the facility knows that there's farming nearby and couldn't complain about the farming that's happening. So as I mentioned, we did an extensive amount of outreach at the beginning of the project. We filed the application back in November of last year, met with the community members that are next door, sent out letters to them, and we met with after the application was deemed complete and it was sent out to the surrounding agencies, that being Caltrans, all the people, as well as the City of Selma due to its sphere of influence. I met with your planner, Brian Hemsey, and the city manager at the time, Henry Perea, on March 15th to talk about the project, went through the exact overview that I gave to you today, and went through any concerns. And the three things that they asked for in addition, well, I guess community outreach was one of them, and we did that. They asked for inclusion of landscaping along McCall Avenue frontage, and the county has required that landscaping to, again, screen any visibility, but again, the site is set back pretty far, as you saw in that site plan overview. And so there, with the existing agricultural use that would continue, it would also screen, so there's a combination of both to consider the screening. We were asked to consider the dedication along of frontage along McCall for a full build out of the road. And so we have included that, or the county has included that in the conditions of approval. So we've met all the requirements that the city manager at the time requested and the planner, and because of that, they sent in a letter to the county back in March saying that there is no need to annex the site and the project could continue. So we've been operating again since then with the understanding that we were on the same page and no concerns. And when we, so then, let me just continue. Oh, here's the outreach that we did. And we talked to some of the residents, and we talked to the neighbors as well. And then we talked about, oh, well, this is I went over this a little bit earlier on, the community solar program, including the savings that you receive if you were to sign up. And oh yeah, that's the website at the very top that you can log in and show your interest in the solar program. So it's a pretty simple effort. But so we went through the process with the county. The conditional use permit must be heard by the planning commission. The county planning department, the staff, who's the professional planners assigned to this project, felt like they could meet all the findings required by the county conditional use permit and recommended approval to the planning commission. The planning commission, unfortunately, they didn't seem that they fully understood the project. They didn't ask anything except for the concerns about the things I mentioned, the agricultural compatibility, the residential compatibility, and they asked staff to draft findings of the project not meeting the findings. And so, because I didn't get the feedback that I normally do from a planning commission, if they had specific concerns that I could address, for instance, if they were concerned about visibility or dust or other things, I could have addressed it at the hearing. They didn't ask for that. I decided to appeal the planning commission's decision, and that's when I was meeting with the Board of Supervisors at the Board of Supervisors meeting. I met with Supervisor Mendez prior to the meeting to talk about the project. He didn't voice any concerns when I met with him. So we were at the hearing, and the mayor did speak, saying that he did not know about the project prior to the hearing, and so because he didn't hear about it and was concerned about the project, I asked for a continuance at the hearing to give time to meet with you and the mayor and anybody else who's concerned. I reached out to the neighbors again. They did not have any concerns, so kind of here.